Laura Allen stood silently at the back of a crowded corporate auditorium while her own husband smiled beneath the spotlight. In front of executives, employees, and invited investors, Kevin Walker proudly announced that the company had finally found someone more valuable to replace his wife's position. Laughter drifted through the room. Laura neither defended herself nor lowered her eyes. She simply closed her notebook after writing one final sentence. None of them, not Kevin, not the board, not even the CEO, knew that only hours earlier, Laura had legally acquired the very rival company they feared most. Before this week ended, every word spoken on that stage would return with consequences no one could stop. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. If you believe dignity is measured by actions rather than loud promises, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next story. Chicago wore its usual weekday rhythm with quiet confidence. Glass towers reflected the pale morning sun. Commuters hurried through intersections with paper cups in hand, and inside the headquarters of Apex Dynamics, another day of decisions had already begun before most employees had finished their first coffee. The company had spent 3 decades growing into one of the country's most respected industrial technology firms, earning contracts with manufacturers, transportation companies, and public infrastructure agencies across the United States. Success had become part of its identity. So had competition. Among the executives arriving that morning, Laura Allen attracted almost no attention, despite being one of the most experienced leaders in the building. She preferred it that way. At 35, Laura had spent more than a decade helping shape Apex Dynamics' long-term strategy. As Chief Strategy Officer, she had overseen acquisitions, market expansions, and complex negotiations that quietly generated hundreds of millions of dollars for the company. Her reports were admired by analysts. Her forecasts were remarkably accurate. And her reputation outside the company often exceeded the recognition she received inside its walls. She never raised her voice during meetings. She rarely interrupted anyone. Whenever disagreements emerged, she simply opened the leather notebook she carried everywhere and wrote down the details with careful handwriting. People often mistook that silence for weakness. Laura knew better. Every meeting produced facts. Every careless promise became a future record. Every decision left evidence. Those habits had been taught to her years earlier by an attorney who once told her that memory fades, but documents rarely do. She had never forgotten that lesson. On the opposite side of the executive floor, Kevin Walker entered the office with entirely different energy. Confident footsteps echoed across the polished hallway as employees greeted him with eager smiles. Kevin was Apex Dynamics' Executive Vice President of Operations, a position that placed him directly beneath Chief Executive Officer Richard Bennett. At 38, Kevin had become the company's rising star. He spoke quickly, made bold promises, and loved announcing ambitious goals before his teams had figured out how to achieve them. To many employees, he looked like the company's future CEO. He enjoyed encouraging that belief. Unlike Laura, Kevin believed leadership meant visibility. He wanted every presentation to carry his name. Every successful project became another opportunity to strengthen his reputation. Every compliment fueled the confidence that had gradually transformed into something far less admirable. Even at homework had become the language of their marriage. Years earlier, Kevin had admired Laura's intelligence. Now he viewed it as competition. Their conversations had slowly changed from discussions about ideas to short exchanges about schedules, bills, and meetings. Dinner often passed in silence. Weekends disappeared beneath conference calls and business travel. The warmth that had once defined their relationship had quietly disappeared without either of them admitting exactly when it happened. Neither had filed for divorce. Neither openly argued. They simply occupied the same house while living increasingly separate lives. Laura accepted the distance without complaint. She had learned that forcing conversations rarely changed. people determined not to listen. That morning, she entered the executive conference room 10 minutes early. She arranged her laptop, placed her notebook beside it, checked the printed agenda, then waited. One by one, department leaders entered. Some nodded politely, others barely acknowledged her. Finally, Richard Bennett walked in. The 63-year-old CEO had built Apex Dynamics from a regional engineering supplier into a national corporation. His instincts had earned respect throughout the industry, but age had slowly changed his priorities. Increasingly, he favored aggressive growth over cautious planning. Kevin fit that vision perfectly. Laura often did not. Richard greeted Kevin warmly. "There you are," he said with an approving smile. "I've been looking over your restructuring proposal." Kevin grinned. "I think you'll like the final version." "I'm sure I will." Laura watched the exchange without expression. She simply noted the exact time the meeting began. Richard opened the discussion by reviewing quarterly performance. Revenue remained strong. Operating costs had decreased. Several expansion projects were moving ahead of schedule. Then attention shifted toward the company's largest challenge, Horizon Innovations. For years, Horizon had remained Apex Dynamics' strongest competitor in advanced logistics software and industrial automation. The two companies competed for the same contracts, recruited from the same universities, and frequently encountered one another during major negotiations. Richard leaned forward. "We're hearing rumors that Horizon is under financial pressure." Kevin smiled immediately. "I've heard the same thing." "If that's true," Richard continued, "this could be our opportunity." Kevin nodded confidently. "We'll outperform them before the year ends." Laura finally spoke. "The reports we've received are incomplete." The room turned toward her. "I recommend verifying the financial information before making strategic decisions." Kevin leaned back in his chair. "We've already waited long enough." Laura remained calm. Assumptions create expensive mistakes. Kevin smiled politely, but the impatience beneath the expression was obvious. Sometimes caution costs more than action. A few executives chuckled softly. Laura said nothing further. Instead, she wrote another sentence inside her notebook. Across the table, Emily Carter noticed. At 29, Emily had joined Apex Dynamics only 3 years earlier as a business development manager. Intelligent, ambitious, and exceptionally charismatic, she understood office politics almost as well as she understood sales. Kevin had become her strongest supporter. He frequently invited her into executive meetings that exceeded her official responsibilities. Many employees believed she was being prepared for rapid promotion. Emily spoke confidently. "Our market analysis suggests Horizon won't recover quickly." Kevin nodded. "Exactly." Richard looked pleased. "This is the kind of confidence we need." Laura quietly highlighted several figures inside the financial packet. None of the numbers supported complete certainty. Yet, she did not argue. Facts would become useful later. Opinions rarely did. When the meeting ended, executives dispersed into smaller conversations. Kevin walked beside Richard toward the elevators. Emily joined them. Laura remained behind, organizing her papers with deliberate precision. A junior analyst approached carefully. "I thought your concerns made sense," he said quietly. Laura offered a small smile. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Why didn't you push harder?" She closed her notebook. People rarely change their minds during a meeting. The analyst frowned. "Then when?" Laura looked through the conference room windows toward the skyline. "When reality arrives." She left before he could ask another question. That afternoon, Laura drove across downtown Chicago instead of returning home immediately after work. Her destination was not another corporate office. It was the downtown headquarters of Brooks and Harper LLP, one of the country's most respected corporate law firms. She entered through a private entrance. A receptionist recognized her immediately. "Miss Allen, Mr. Brooks is expecting you." Daniel Brooks stood as she entered the conference room. In his early 50s, Daniel had spent decades specializing in mergers, acquisitions, and complex corporate governance matters, calm, methodical, and relentlessly precise. He had represented investment funds, Fortune 500 companies, and institutional shareholders throughout his career. He shook Laura's hand. "Everything remains on schedule." Laura sat. "No delays." Daniel slid a sealed folder across the table. "None." She opened it carefully. Inside were updated legal timelines, confidentiality agreements, regulatory filings, and transaction schedules. Every page carried precise dates. Every signature had been verified. Every requirement had been satisfied. Daniel lowered his voice. "The fewer people who know, the better." Laura nodded. "I understand. The other side continues honoring the confidentiality agreement." "Good." Daniel studied her for a moment. "You've handled this remarkably well." Laura smiled faintly. "I've had time to prepare." He hesitated. "Does Kevin suspect anything?" "No." "And no one at Apex?" She shook her head once. "Not yet." Daniel closed the folder. "Then we continue exactly as planned." Laura stood. "There won't be any unnecessary surprises." Daniel answered quietly. "There never are with you." Outside evening settled across Chicago. Laura paused before unlocking her car. She looked toward the glowing skyline where Apex Dynamics headquarters stood among dozens of other towers. Somewhere inside that building, plans were already being made for her replacement. Somewhere else, signatures were quietly moving toward the final stage of a transaction that would permanently reshape the balance of power between two rival companies. Neither event had happened by accident. Neither would remain secret for much longer. When Laura arrived home later that evening, Kevin was already in his home office speaking loudly during a video conference. She walked past without interrupting. As she reached the staircase, Kevin ended his call. Without looking away from his laptop, he spoke. "Next week is going to be interesting." Laura stopped. "Why?" Kevin smiled to himself. "The leadership team is about to look very different." Laura held his gaze for only a second. "I see." She walked upstairs carrying her notebook. Kevin never noticed that she had already written down every word. The following Monday began with a series of executive meetings that filled nearly every conference room on the top floor of Apex Dynamics. Employees hurried through the corridors carrying presentation folders and laptops, unaware that subtle changes in seating arrangements often revealed more about the company's future than official announcements ever did. Laura Allen noticed the changes immediately. She always did. When she entered the main strategy conference room, the chair that had belonged to the chief strategy officer for years remained in its usual place. Yet another chair had been added directly beside Kevin Walker's seat. Emily Carter was already sitting there. She greeted everyone with practiced confidence. "Good morning." Several department heads returned her smile. Laura quietly took her own seat without acknowledging the unusual arrangement. She placed her notebook on the polished table, opened it, wrote the date, then waited. Richard Bennett entered moments later. "I'd like to move quickly today," the CEO announced. "We have several strategic initiatives that can't be delayed." Kevin leaned forward. "I've asked Emily to participate more actively in these discussions." Richard nodded without hesitation. "I think that's appropriate. No one questioned the decision. Laura simply wrote another sentence. The meeting began with discussions about market expansion. For years, Laura had personally led negotiations involving major transportation contracts throughout the Midwest. Those projects normally fell under her department. Today was different. Kevin stood. I'll let Emily walk everyone through the proposal. Emily connected her laptop to the presentation screen. She spoke smoothly. Her slides were polished. Her delivery was confident. She had clearly rehearsed. Yet Laura recognized something almost immediately. Several recommendations had been copied almost word for word from a strategy document she had written 6 months earlier. The phrasing was slightly different. The charts had been redesigned. But the underlying analysis remained unmistakably hers. Emily reached the conclusion. I believe this approach positions Apex ahead of Horizon Innovations over the next 18 months. Richard smiled. Excellent work. Kevin nodded proudly. This is exactly the kind of fresh thinking we need. Across the room, Laura said nothing. She simply opened the printed copy of her own report from 6 months earlier. Using a yellow pencil, she marked identical paragraphs. Then she noted the page numbers. No accusation, no interruption, only documentation. The meeting continued. Kevin gradually redirected more conversations toward Emily. Whenever Laura prepared to answer a question, Kevin often spoke first. Sometimes he finished her sentences. Other times, he shifted the discussion before she had the opportunity to explain her analysis. Most executives hardly noticed. Those who did remained silent. Corporate politics rewarded observation far less often than loyalty. After the meeting, Emily caught up with Kevin near the executive elevators. I think that went well. Kevin smiled. You handled yourself exactly the way I expected. What about Laura? Kevin shrugged. She'll adjust. Emily hesitated. She's respected. For now. They disappeared into Kevin's office. Neither realized that another executive assistant had already uploaded the meeting recording into the company's secure archive. Laura knew every executive meeting was automatically recorded. She also knew the retention policy required those files to remain preserved for several years. Evidence rarely disappeared as completely as people imagined. Instead of returning directly to her office, Laura visited the company's document management department. She smiled politely at the records coordinator. I need copies of today's meeting materials. No problem. And I'd also appreciate the revision history for the strategy presentation. The coordinator looked surprised. The revision history? Yes. It's available. Thank you. Within minutes, she received the electronic files. Every revision carried timestamps. Every edit recorded the author's identity. Every uploaded version remained permanently archived. Laura saved the files into a secure folder. Then she added another note inside her notebook. Facts, dates, names, nothing more. Later that afternoon, Kevin scheduled a smaller executive workshop involving only department heads. Again, Emily attended. Again, Laura watched quietly. This meeting focused on organizational restructuring. Kevin walked toward the whiteboard. Our company needs faster decision-making. Heads nodded. We've become too dependent on unnecessary review processes. Laura understood exactly what he meant. Most internal reviews passed through her office. Those reviews often identified legal exposure before contracts were approved. Kevin considered them obstacles. Laura considered them protection. Kevin continued. I'm proposing that strategic approvals move directly through operations. Richard glanced around the room. Thoughts? Several executives remained silent. Finally, Laura spoke. Reducing oversight increases risk. Kevin smiled politely. Only if people aren't prepared. Laura met his eyes. Internal controls exist because preparation isn't perfect. Emily interrupted. Companies that move faster usually outperform slower competitors. Laura looked toward her. Sometimes. Emily folded her arms. The market rewards bold leadership. Laura answered calmly. It also punishes preventable mistakes. Silence settled over the room. Richard cleared his throat. We'll evaluate both perspectives. Kevin immediately redirected attention. Let's continue. Laura wrote another sentence. No emotion appeared on her face. Only careful observation. When the workshop ended, several employees gathered outside discussing possible promotions. One whispered quietly, I heard Emily might become vice president. Another replied, eventually maybe. No, I think much sooner. Laura passed them without reacting. Rumors had become common. Speculation required no response. That evening, she left Apex Dynamics precisely at 6 o'clock. Her destination once again was Brooks and Harper LLP. Daniel Brooks welcomed her into the same private conference room. He closed the door before speaking. We've completed another stage. Laura sat. Any complications? None. Daniel opened a confidential folder. Inside rested dozens of legal documents, purchase agreements, regulatory correspondence, corporate ownership charts, escrow confirmations. Every page reflected months of meticulous preparation. Daniel pointed toward one schedule. The financing institutions have approved the final structure. Laura reviewed the numbers carefully. The board. They voted unanimously. No objections, not after reviewing your long-term operating plan. Laura closed the folder. When does the next step begin? Daniel answered without hesitation. Within days. He leaned back slightly. You're still comfortable remaining completely invisible. Laura smiled faintly. Visibility isn't necessary. Most buyers would already be speaking publicly. I'm not most buyers. Daniel nodded. I've noticed. He studied her expression. You've never asked for revenge. Laura looked toward the conference room window overlooking downtown Chicago. I don't need revenge. What do you need? She answered after a long pause. Accuracy. Daniel understood immediately. For months they had discussed legal procedures, corporate governance, shareholder rights, regulatory compliance. Never once had Laura spoken about humiliating Kevin. Never once had she asked how to destroy his career. Her only instructions had remained remarkably consistent. Everything must be lawful. Everything must be documented. Everything must withstand scrutiny. Daniel respected that discipline more than she realized. Before leaving, he handed her another sealed envelope. Keep this unopened until I tell you. Laura accepted it. I will. No one else? No one. She placed it carefully inside her briefcase. Outside rain had begun falling across the city. Traffic moved slowly beneath glowing streetlights. Laura drove home in silence. Meanwhile, Kevin attended a private dinner with Richard Bennett and several senior executives at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. Wine glasses clinked. Conversations grew louder. Kevin appeared relaxed. Richard raised his glass. I think we're entering a remarkable year. Kevin smiled. I agree. Richard continued. If everything goes according to plan, we'll leave Horizon Innovations behind. Kevin laughed confidently. They won't know what hit them. Several executives joined the laughter. No one questioned the optimism. No one imagined that Horizon's future had already begun changing beyond their view. Hours later, Kevin arrived home. Laura sat in the living room reading financial reports. He loosened his tie. "You worked late." "So did you." Kevin poured himself a glass of water. "Richard's very impressed lately." "I'm glad. He thinks we're building the strongest executive team in company history." Laura closed the report. "That's encouraging." Kevin studied her. "You don't seem surprised." Laura answered evenly. "You've been saying that for months." Kevin smiled. "This time, it's different." She waited. He continued. "There are going to be some important announcements soon." Laura nodded once. "I'm sure there will." Kevin expected questions. She asked none. He expected concern. She showed none. Eventually, he returned to his office upstairs. Laura remained in the quiet living room. She opened her notebook once more. Under the day's final entry, she wrote a single sentence. "Some people reveal their plans long before they realize someone is listening." Then she closed the notebook. Across the city inside, secure servers archived emails, recorded meetings, revision histories. Electronic signatures and confidential legal filings continued accumulating one by one. Individually, they seemed ordinary. Together, they were quietly becoming a complete record of everything that had happened. Laura intended to let the record speak when the time finally came. Tuesday morning brought a steady rain that blurred the skyline outside Apex Dynamics headquarters. Employees hurried from the parking garage, carrying umbrellas and laptop bags, shaking water from their coats, before stepping into the marble lobby. Inside, however, the atmosphere felt unusually energetic. Rumors about an upcoming corporate restructuring had spread across nearly every department. No official announcement had been made, yet everyone seemed convinced that major changes were only days away. Laura Allen arrived at exactly 7:45 a.m., as she did almost every weekday. The security guard at the front desk greeted her with a familiar smile. "Morning, Miss Allen?" "Good morning." She rode the elevator alone to the executive floor, unlocked her office, and immediately began reviewing overnight market reports. One headline caught her attention. Several financial publications continued speculating that Horizon Innovations might soon seek outside investors after a difficult quarter. Laura knew the articles contained only fragments of the truth. The negotiations had already moved far beyond outside investment. She closed the report without making any comment. At 8:30, her calendar displayed a new invitation: Executive Leadership Strategy Session, mandatory attendance, organizer Kevin Walker, location Executive Boardroom. Laura printed the agenda, slipped it into her notebook, and walked toward the boardroom. Kevin was already standing near the large presentation screen when the executives entered. Unlike previous meetings, he appeared unusually confident. He greeted nearly everyone by name. Emily Carter stood beside him, organizing printed handouts. Richard Bennett entered last. "Let's begin." Kevin dimmed the lights. "Our growth plan requires faster execution." The first slides focused on projected expansion into new regional markets. Then came organizational charts. Laura noticed something immediately. Her department had been divided into 3 smaller reporting groups. 2 of those groups would now report directly to operations, Kevin's department. He continued speaking as though the change were merely administrative. "Our current structure creates unnecessary delays." One executive asked, "Who will oversee strategic integration?" Kevin smiled. "We're creating a new leadership model." Emily handed additional packets around the table. Laura opened hers carefully. The proposed reporting lines reduced nearly half of her authority. She quietly compared the packet with last quarter's organizational chart. Every alteration had been highlighted. She wrote the page numbers into her notebook. Nothing escaped documentation. Richard folded his hands. "I believe this will improve efficiency." Kevin nodded. "Our competitors move faster." Laura finally looked up. "Efficiency depends on maintaining accountability." Kevin answered immediately. "Accountability won't disappear. Some oversight will." Kevin smiled politely. "Only unnecessary oversight." Laura remained calm. "Who determines what's unnecessary?" Silence followed. Richard cleared his throat. "We're discussing operational flexibility." Laura spoke without raising her voice. "Operational flexibility should never reduce governance." Emily leaned forward. "Many technology companies have already adopted flatter structures." Laura turned toward her. "They've also experienced governance failures when controls were removed too quickly." Emily responded confidently. "We're not those companies." Laura simply answered, "Every company believes that before problems appear." No one replied. Kevin resumed the presentation. Within minutes, the conversation moved elsewhere. Laura returned to writing. Across the table, Chief Financial Officer Michael Reynolds observed the exchange carefully. Michael had spent 25 years overseeing corporate finance. Unlike many executives, he rarely aligned himself openly with office politics. After the meeting ended, he caught Laura near the hallway. "You noticed the reporting changes?" "I did." He lowered his voice. "They moved faster than I expected." Laura looked at him. "Did you approve them?" "No." "Did finance?" "Not formally." Laura nodded once. "Thank you." Michael hesitated. "I don't know exactly what's happening." "You don't have to." He watched her for a moment. "You seem unusually calm." Laura smiled politely. "I've learned that timing matters." Michael wondered what she meant. Before he could ask, Laura had already walked away. Kevin spent the remainder of the morning visiting departments throughout the building. Everywhere he went, employees greeted him enthusiastically. He enjoyed being seen. He congratulated managers, promised promotions, spoke about the company's bright future. When someone asked whether additional leadership opportunities were coming, Kevin laughed. "Let's just say some people should prepare for bigger offices." Employees exchanged excited looks. Word spread quickly. Emily accompanied him almost everywhere. By lunchtime, many workers had already begun referring to her as the company's future chief strategy officer. Emily never corrected them. Instead, she smiled modestly. Inside her office, Laura continued reviewing contract files. She barely noticed the whispers outside her door. At 1 o'clock, her assistant entered. "Miss Allen?" "Yes." "You received another courier package." Laura accepted the envelope. No company logo appeared on it, only her name. She locked her office door before opening it. Inside rested several updated legal documents, a confidential memorandum, regulatory approval notices, a revised transaction schedule, and a handwritten note. Everything remains on schedule. Final authorization expected within 72 hours. Daniel Laura folded the note carefully. Then she placed every document inside a locked drawer. No copies remained on her desk. Moments later, someone knocked. "Emily." Laura unlocked the door. Emily entered, carrying a folder. "I wanted to ask about several strategy files." Laura gestured toward a chair. Emily remained standing. "I'll be taking over some of these projects soon." Laura looked at her quietly. "Has that been officially announced?" Emily hesitated. "Not officially." Laura nodded. "Then I'll continue handling them until it is." Emily forced a smile. I suppose that's fair. She placed the folder on the desk. I'll need access eventually, when the company authorizes it. Emily crossed her arms. You always follow procedure? Laura answered evenly. Yes. Emily shook her head. Sometimes I think procedure slows everything down. Laura closed the folder. Procedure protects everyone. Emily gave a polite smile that failed to hide her impatience. We'll see. She left. Laura wrote another note. Conversation regarding unauthorized access request. Date, time, subject, nothing more. That evening, Laura drove once again to Brooks and Harper LLP. Daniel Brooks greeted her inside a secure conference room where several additional professionals waited. Among them sat Rebecca Collins, Senior Managing Director from Hamilton Equity Partners. The investment firm had remained invisible throughout months of negotiations. Rebecca extended her hand. Miss Allen? Miss Collins. Daniel closed the conference room door. Rebecca opened a presentation. The selling shareholders have accepted every remaining condition. Laura listened carefully. Rebecca continued. Financing has cleared. Daniel added, the regulatory filings are complete. Rebecca pointed toward another document. Tomorrow morning, the escrow verification begins. Laura asked, and confidentiality? Rebecca answered immediately. No disclosure before closing. Laura nodded. Good. Daniel slid another binder toward her. These are the final due diligence reports. Laura reviewed them slowly. Financial statements, employment liabilities, pending litigation, technology assets, environmental compliance, cybersecurity audits. Every section had been independently verified. Daniel watched her. Any concerns? Laura closed the binder. Only one. Rebecca looked up. Which is, I don't want unnecessary layoffs after closing. Rebecca smiled. That condition has already been included. Laura relaxed slightly. Thank you. Daniel knew that point had mattered more to her than purchase price during the negotiations. She had repeatedly insisted that acquiring a company meant accepting responsibility for its employees. Profit alone had never motivated her. Rebecca finally asked the question that had lingered for weeks. When this becomes public, you'll receive considerable attention. Laura answered without hesitation. I'd rather focus on running the company. Rebecca laughed softly. Most buyers enjoy headlines. I'm not buying headlines. Daniel smiled quietly. He had expected exactly that answer. Across town, Kevin hosted another dinner meeting. This time, only Richard Bennett and Emily Carter attended. Richard raised an important topic. Have you decided when to announce the restructuring? Kevin nodded confidently. Next week. And Laura? Kevin shrugged. She'll remain employed. Richard looked surprised. Really? For a while. Emily smiled. It'll make the transition easier. Kevin lifted his glass. The company needs leaders who embrace the future. Neither Richard nor Emily questioned the statement. None of them realized that another leadership transition had already been legally scheduled beyond their knowledge. Late that night, Laura returned home. Carrying only her notebook, Kevin was asleep. The house remained silent. She sat alone at the kitchen table. Opening the notebook, she reviewed pages filled over many months. Dates, meetings, emails, statements, promises, approvals. Every entry connected to another. Each piece by itself appeared ordinary. Together, they formed a remarkably complete history. She added one final sentence beneath the day's notes. Power often changes hands long before anyone notices. She closed the notebook. Somewhere inside, secure financial institutions, electronic authorizations continued moving quietly from one verified account to another. Inside government databases, regulatory confirmations waited for automatic release. Inside law offices, sealed documents rested inside locked cabinets. And inside Apex Dynamics, Kevin Walker continued reorganizing a company without realizing that the competitor he believed was collapsing had already found its new owner. The moment those two stories collided was drawing closer with every passing hour. Wednesday began with unexpected optimism inside Apex Dynamics. The previous evening, several business news outlets had published articles suggesting that Horizon Innovations was struggling to secure additional financing. Market commentators speculated that the company's board had only weeks to stabilize operations before considering significant restructuring. By 8 o'clock that morning, employees throughout Apex Dynamics were already discussing the headlines. Kevin Walker enjoyed every conversation. He walked through the executive floor carrying a printed copy of one of the articles. "I told you this would happen," he said confidently to a group of senior managers. "They're running out of options." One manager asked cautiously, "Should we verify the reports?" Kevin folded the newspaper. "The market has already done that for us." Several people nodded. Only Michael Reynolds, the chief financial officer, remained unconvinced. He had spent enough years studying corporate finance to know that public speculation often hid more than it revealed. Still, he said nothing. Without verified information, even his doubts remained only opinions. Across the hallway, Laura Allen had already finished reading the same articles. She recognized several facts. She also recognized the information that had been deliberately omitted. Every reporter believed Horizon was desperately searching for investors. Not one of them knew that the company had already chosen its buyer. Laura closed the browser window and returned to reviewing a lengthy spreadsheet outlining Apex Dynamics' strategic investments over the previous 3 years. She highlighted several projects, not because they had failed, because many had bypassed the internal review procedures that her office had previously required. Every highlighted project represented another decision approved under Kevin's increasingly centralized authority. Every approval had left a digital trail. At precisely 9:30, Laura received an encrypted message on her secure phone. Daniel Brooks. Only 3 words appeared. Board approved unanimously. Nothing else. No celebration. No explanation. Laura read the message twice before deleting the notification. Then she opened her notebook and quietly wrote, "Board authorization completed. 9:31 a.m. No emotion accompanied the entry, only another verified fact. An hour later, Richard Bennett convened another executive meeting. Unlike previous sessions, today's discussion focused almost entirely on organizational restructuring. Kevin stood before the large screen once again. "I believe we're ready to finalize leadership adjustments." Richard nodded. "Go ahead." Kevin advanced to the next slide. Several names appeared beneath new reporting structures. Emily Carter's responsibilities had expanded considerably. Laura's department had been divided even further. This time, the proposed changes left little doubt about Kevin's intentions. Although Laura technically retained her title, much of her authority would disappear. Kevin explained the proposal with polished confidence. The company needs a leadership model built around speed, adaptability, and decisive execution. One board advisor asked, "Have department heads reviewed these changes?" Kevin answered, before anyone else could speak, "They've been informed." Laura looked toward him calmly. "Informed isn't the same as consulted." Kevin smiled. The outcome wouldn't change. Laura replied evenly, "Perhaps." Richard interjected, "We've discussed these ideas for months." Laura nodded. "We've discussed efficiency." She turned another page in her notebook. We haven't discussed reducing independent strategic oversight. Kevin crossed his arms. We're simplifying decision-making. Laura looked directly at Richard. Then I recommend documenting the reasons for each governance change. Richard frowned slightly. For legal purposes. For institutional memory. Kevin laughed softly. We're restructuring an organization, Laura. She answered without raising her voice. And organizational memory becomes most valuable after leadership changes. The room grew noticeably quieter. Michael Reynolds glanced toward Laura. That sentence lingered longer than anyone expected. Richard eventually cleared his throat. We'll have corporate legal prepare additional documentation. Laura simply nodded. Thank you. She wrote another note. Recommendation accepted. Time recorded. When the meeting concluded, Emily followed Kevin into his office. She appeared energized. I think Richard's completely on board. Kevin smiled. He is. What about Laura? Kevin shrugged. She's documenting everything. Emily laughed. She always does. Kevin walked toward the window overlooking downtown Chicago. People mistake paperwork for influence. Emily joined him. Do you think she'll resign? I doubt it. Why not? Kevin answered confidently. Because she knows there won't be a better opportunity elsewhere. Neither of them realized how profoundly mistaken that assumption would become. Later that afternoon, Laura left Apex Dynamics during her lunch hour. Instead of driving to Brooks and Harper, she arrived at a discreet office building several blocks away. The directory listed only one tenant on the 18th floor. Hamilton Equity Partners. The investment firm's reception area reflected understated professionalism rather than luxury. Rebecca Collins welcomed Laura personally. Good to see you. You too. They entered a private conference room where several large monitors displayed transaction timelines. Rebecca pointed toward one screen. We're entering the final 48 hours. Laura studied the schedule. Escrow verification, regulatory confirmation, shareholder transfer, ownership registration. Every stage had precise timestamps. Daniel Brooks joined them carrying another thick binder. The escrow institution confirmed receipt of all required funds, Laura asked. Any outstanding conditions? Daniel shook his head. Only the scheduled release. Rebecca smiled. Everything else has already been completed. Laura remained silent for several moments while reviewing the documents. Finally, she looked up. What about employee protections? Rebecca anticipated the question. The employment continuity agreement has been incorporated into the closing package. No reductions. Not unless operational necessity requires them later. Laura nodded slowly. That's acceptable. Daniel leaned forward. There's one final matter. He slid a confidential document toward her. The board wants confirmation that you'll personally assume the position of chair immediately after closing. Laura read every paragraph carefully. I'll accept. Rebecca smiled. I suspected you would. Laura signed the acknowledgement. Daniel witnessed the signature. Then he placed the document inside a secure folder. Months of preparation had quietly reached another milestone. Back at Apex Dynamics, Kevin was meeting privately with Richard Bennett. Several organizational charts covered the conference table. Richard studied them thoughtfully. You've placed Emily into a surprisingly large role. Kevin nodded. She has potential. Richard looked uncertain. Potential isn't experience. Kevin answered quickly. Experience comes with responsibility. Richard remained silent. Then he asked the question Kevin had been expecting. What happens to Laura? Kevin leaned back comfortably. We'll transition her into an advisory capacity. Richard frowned. She won't appreciate that. Kevin smiled. She doesn't have many alternatives. Richard considered the answer. After several seconds, he nodded. Prepare the announcement. Kevin's confidence grew even stronger. Everything appeared to be unfolding exactly as he had planned. That evening, Daniel Brooks called Laura instead of sending another message. I wanted to hear your voice before tomorrow. Laura smiled faintly. Everything still on schedule? Yes. He paused. I've handled acquisitions worth billions of dollars. And I've rarely seen someone remain this calm. Laura looked out across the Chicago skyline from her apartment window. Nervousness won't improve the documents. Daniel laughed quietly. No, it never does. Another brief silence followed. Finally, Daniel spoke again. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll receive final banking confirmation. And after that, the ownership transfer becomes irreversible. Laura thanked him before ending the call. She stood quietly for several minutes. Outside city lights stretched across the horizon. Somewhere beyond those lights stood Horizon Innovations. Another building housed Apex Dynamics. Soon, their relationship would change forever. Not because of hostility, not because of revenge, because of lawful ownership, because of carefully negotiated agreements, because every signature had been placed exactly where it belonged. Kevin arrived home later than usual. He found Laura reading in the living room. Without sitting down, he loosened his tie. I spoke with Richard today. Laura looked up. How did it go? Very well. He poured himself a glass of sparkling water. The restructuring is almost ready. Laura closed her book. I imagine everyone has been working hard. Kevin smiled. You'll understand soon enough. She studied him quietly. I hope the company benefits. Kevin seemed almost disappointed by her lack of curiosity. You aren't going to ask what changes are coming, Laura answered softly. I'll read the official announcement when it's released. Kevin laughed. Always professional. Laura returned the faintest smile. It's usually the safest approach. Kevin walked upstairs, convinced she had completely accepted whatever future awaited her. He never imagined that at nearly the same moment, encrypted banking systems were preparing the final authorization that would make Laura Allen the legal owner of the very competitor he believed was collapsing. She opened her notebook one last time before going to bed. Beneath the day's entries, she wrote only a single sentence. The loudest plans often disappear the moment they meet signed documents. She closed the notebook, switched off the light, and allowed the quiet certainty of preparation to replace every temptation to react too early. The decisive moment was no longer months away. It was now measured in hours. Thursday morning arrived with unusual tension across the executive offices of Apex Dynamics. Although no formal announcement had yet been released, employees sensed that something significant was approaching. Department directors were asked to update organizational charts. Human Resources quietly requested revised reporting structures. Executive assistants received instructions to reserve the auditorium for the following Tuesday. Nothing was explained. Everything suggested change. Laura Allen reached the office shortly before 8 o'clock. As always, she walked directly to her office before speaking to anyone. She unlocked the door, placed her notebook on the desk, and began reviewing the day's calendar. 3 executive meetings, 1 compliance review, a conference call with outside consultants, nothing unusual. Her secure phone vibrated once. Daniel Brooks. No words, only an encrypted attachment. Laura downloaded it, entered the security code, and opened the file. The first page displayed a confirmation from the escrow institution. Transfer conditions satisfied. The second page contained confirmation from the acquiring entity's financial institution. Funds verified. The third page listed the scheduled closing time. Friday, 11:00 a.m. Laura quietly locked the document inside an encrypted folder. She neither smiled nor celebrated. She simply opened her notebook and wrote, "Escrow complete. Verification received. Closing scheduled." Another fact, another step, another page, nothing more. At 9 o'clock, the weekly operations review began. Kevin Walker stood at the head of the conference table with visible confidence. Charts covered the display screens, production forecasts, expansion targets, cost reductions. Everything reflected ambitious growth. Kevin pointed toward a graph. "Our operating margins have improved every quarter." Several executives nodded. Richard Bennett appeared pleased. "This is exactly what shareholders expect." Michael Reynolds adjusted his glasses. "We've also increased operational risk." Kevin looked toward him. "Calculated risk." Michael answered carefully. "Some internal approvals have been accelerated." Kevin smiled. "That's intentional." Laura remained silent. Michael continued. "I'd still recommend documenting the exceptions." Kevin folded his arms. "We're trying to remove bureaucracy." Laura finally spoke. "Documentation isn't bureaucracy." The room became quiet. "It's institutional protection." Kevin answered almost immediately. "We don't need permission slips for every decision." Laura looked directly at him. "No, we need accountability." Richard leaned forward. "Do you believe we've ignored compliance?" Laura chose her words carefully. "I believe several approval chains have been shortened." Kevin interrupted. "Because they slowed progress." Laura remained calm. "They also reduced legal exposure." Emily Carter entered the conversation. "Most successful companies empower managers to move quickly." Laura turned toward her. "They also expect those managers to explain their decisions later." Emily smiled politely. "I'm comfortable doing that." Laura nodded once. "I'm glad." She wrote another line inside her notebook. Time, topic, participants, nothing else. After the meeting, Michael Reynolds caught up with Laura near the elevator lobby. "I've reviewed several project approvals." Laura waited. "Some signatures concern me." She asked quietly, "Have you raised the issue?" "Not yet." "Why?" Michael hesitated. "I'm still gathering information." Laura nodded. "That's wise." He looked at her carefully. "You've been gathering information for months." She offered only a small smile. "Information usually becomes more valuable when it's complete." Michael watched her step into the elevator. For reasons he couldn't explain, he left the conversation feeling that Laura understood events unfolding far beyond anything visible inside Apex Dynamics. Meanwhile, Kevin spent the afternoon preparing for the upcoming restructuring announcement. Emily joined him in his office. Stacks of organizational charts covered the conference table. Kevin circled several executive positions with a blue marker. "We'll announce these first." Emily examined the list. "My responsibilities have nearly doubled." Kevin smiled. "You've earned it." She looked genuinely excited. "When do we tell everyone?" "Tuesday." Emily hesitated. "And Laura?" Kevin shrugged. "She'll hear it with everyone else." Emily laughed softly. "That'll be awkward." Kevin leaned back in his chair. Business isn't about comfort. Neither noticed that the office door had remained slightly open. Outside, Kevin's executive assistant had heard only fragments of the conversation. enough to understand that major changes were indeed coming. Within an hour, rumors spread through 3 departments. By late afternoon, many employees believed Laura's departure had already been decided. Laura heard the rumors too. Her assistant entered quietly. People are talking. Laura continued reviewing a contract. They usually are. They think you're leaving. Laura looked up. Did someone announce that? No. Then it's only speculation. Her assistant nodded slowly. I suppose. Laura returned to her work. Speculation required no response. Facts eventually replaced rumors on their own. At 4 o'clock, Laura drove to Brooks and Harper LLP. Daniel Brooks greeted her with unusual seriousness. The final legal review is complete. He invited her into the secure conference room. Rebecca Collins was already waiting. Several sealed folders rested neatly across the table. Daniel opened the first. These are the executed purchase agreements. The second. These contain the shareholder resolutions. The third. These are tomorrow's ownership certificates. Laura reviewed every page. Every signature matched. Every date aligned. Every regulatory approval had been attached. Rebecca pointed toward another document. The banking institutions confirmed simultaneous settlement. Laura asked, "No remaining contingencies?" Rebecca smiled. "None." Daniel closed the folder carefully. At 11 tomorrow morning, Horizon Innovations officially belongs to its new owner. Laura remained silent. Daniel studied her expression. I've handled many acquisitions. She looked at him. I know. Most clients become emotional the day before closing. Laura glanced down at the documents. I've been preparing for this for nearly a year. Daniel nodded. It shows. Rebecca leaned forward. There is one question. Laura waited. After the acquisition becomes public, reporters will ask why you remained anonymous. Laura answered without hesitation. Because negotiations aren't performances. Rebecca smiled. I expected that answer. Daniel added quietly. And because surprises are sometimes created by patience rather than secrecy. Laura looked toward him. Both matter. The meeting continued for another hour. Daniel carefully explained tomorrow's schedule. 10:30. Final banking confirmation. 10:45. Government registry update. 11. Ownership transfer. 11:15. Corporate board notification. 11:30. Press release prepared for distribution. Laura memorized every stage. No detail was left uncertain. Before leaving, Daniel handed her one sealed envelope. This stays closed until after 11. Laura accepted it. I understand. If anyone asks questions tomorrow morning, I'll continue working. Daniel smiled, as though nothing unusual is happening. She nodded. Because until 11, nothing has. At nearly the same time, Kevin attended an informal dinner with Richard Bennett and 2 outside consultants. Conversation focused on Apex Dynamics' future. Richard raised his glass. I've never been more confident. Kevin smiled. Next week will mark a turning point. One consultant asked, what about Horizon? Kevin laughed. They're too busy trying to survive. Everyone around the table smiled. Only the consultant remained thoughtful. I've learned never to underestimate quiet companies. Kevin dismissed the comment. They've already lost. No one challenged him further. Late that evening, Laura returned home, carrying only her notebook and the sealed envelope. Kevin was watching financial news. A commentator discussed increased merger activity across the technology sector. Kevin barely listened. Laura paused briefly. Interesting, she thought. The market could sense movement. It simply couldn't identify where. Kevin muted the television. Big day tomorrow. Laura looked at him. For you. For the company. She smiled politely. I hope everything goes according to plan. It will. He sounded completely certain. Laura nodded. I'm sure tomorrow will be memorable. Kevin interpreted the sentence as support. He had no reason to hear the deeper meaning hidden beneath her calm voice. After he went upstairs, Laura sat alone at the dining table. She opened her notebook one final time that evening. Beneath pages filled with months of observations, she wrote, Tomorrow opinions become records. Then she closed the notebook and placed it beside the unopened envelope. Outside, Chicago settled into quiet darkness. Inside financial institutions, automated systems waited for scheduled execution. Inside government databases, ownership records stood ready for immediate update. Inside law offices, attorneys prepared for the final conference calls. And inside Apex Dynamics, Kevin Walker slept, believing that he controlled the future of both his company and his marriage. By the following afternoon, neither belief would remain intact. Friday dawned beneath clear skies, the heavy rain from earlier in the week, replaced by crisp sunlight reflecting across downtown Chicago. From the upper floors of Apex Dynamics, the city looked calm, almost indifferent to the decisions that would quietly reshape two corporations before the day was over. At exactly 7:30 a.m., Laura Allen arrived at the office. Nothing about her appearance suggested that this morning differed from any other. She wore the same navy business suit she often chose for executive meetings. The same leather notebook rested beneath her arm. The same composed expression greeted the receptionist as she entered the building. Good morning, Miss Allen. Good morning. She rode the elevator to the executive floor, answered several routine emails, reviewed 2 contract summaries, approved a departmental budget revision. Anyone watching would have concluded she was simply beginning another ordinary workday. That illusion mattered. Daniel Brooks had reminded her repeatedly that until the transaction officially closed, every action should appear completely routine. Laura intended to follow that advice. At 8:15 a.m., Kevin Walker entered the executive suite with noticeably different energy. He stopped outside several offices to exchange greetings with department directors. Morning. Looking forward to next week. A vice president smiled. I hear we've got exciting announcements coming. Kevin grinned. You'll like what you hear. Across the hallway, Emily Carter joined him, carrying a tablet filled with organizational charts. I finalized the transition schedule. Kevin glanced through the document. Excellent. Emily lowered her voice. Has Richard approved everything? He signed off late yesterday. And Laura? Kevin smiled, almost casually. She still doesn't know. Emily laughed softly. She'll be shocked. Kevin shrugged. Business changes. Neither noticed Michael Reynolds passing farther down the corridor. He had heard only the final sentence. Not enough to understand its context, enough to recognize that something significant remained deliberately hidden. At 9:00 a.m., the executive committee gathered for what appeared to be a routine financial update. Richard Bennett opened the meeting. We'll keep this brief. Michael Reynolds reviewed quarterly cash flow, operating expenses, capital expenditures, forecasted revenue. Everything appeared stable. Then Richard turned toward Kevin. How are preparations for Tuesday? Kevin answered confidently. Complete. Emily has already prepared the transition documents. Laura continued taking notes without looking up. Richard smiled. I appreciate efficient planning. Michael noticed Laura writing continuously. She hadn't challenged a single statement. She hadn't questioned any assumption. That quietness unsettled him more than open disagreement would have. When the meeting ended, Richard asked everyone except Kevin to leave. Laura gathered her papers. As she reached the door, Kevin spoke. "Laura." She turned. "I'd appreciate it if you kept Tuesday afternoon available." "I'll check my calendar." "I'd rather you didn't schedule anything." Laura nodded politely. "I understand." She walked out. Kevin watched her disappear into the hallway. For the first time in months, he felt almost relieved. Everything was finally coming together. At 10:18 a.m., Laura's secure phone vibrated once. "Daniel Brooks, ready." She replied with a single word, "Understood," nothing more. She closed the message, returned to reviewing a procurement proposal. Outside her office, employees continued discussing ordinary business matters. Inside conference rooms, managers debated budgets. Telephones rang, printers hummed. The building carried on as though history were not quietly approaching. At exactly 10:30 a.m. inside Brooks and Harper LLP, Daniel Brooks entered the firm's secure transactions center. Large digital displays tracked every stage of the acquisition. Rebecca Collins stood beside him. The escrow institution had joined through encrypted video conference. Legal representatives for Horizon Innovations were already connected. Daniel checked the clock. "Proceed." The banking representative confirmed the first authorization. "Funds verified." Rebecca marked the checklist. The government registry representative confirmed receipt of ownership filings. "Documents accepted." Another box received a check mark. Daniel remained calm. Months of preparation had reduced today's work to careful execution. No speeches, no celebration, only procedure. Meanwhile, Laura attended a departmental planning meeting inside Apex Dynamics. A project manager discussed software implementation schedules. Another reviewed staffing forecasts. Laura listened attentively. She contributed several recommendations. No one in the room suspected that part of her attention remained fixed on the time displayed in the corner of the conference room screen. 10:41. 10 more minutes. At Brooks and Harper, Daniel received another confirmation. Regulatory clearance complete. Rebecca smiled faintly. Everything's aligning perfectly. Daniel looked toward the final checklist. Only one item remained: ownership transfer. At Apex Dynamics, Kevin walked confidently toward Richard Bennett's office. Richard looked up from several financial reports. "Everything ready?" Kevin nodded. "Tuesday will go exactly as planned." Richard leaned back. "I've trusted your judgment. You won't regret it." Richard smiled. "I hope not." Kevin had every reason to believe those words would prove true. 10:58 a.m. Daniel Brooks stood before the secure display. Everyone in the transaction center became silent. The banking institution initiated the final release. Electronic authorizations moved simultaneously between verified accounts. Escrow dissolved. Ownership transferred. Government databases updated automatically. Rebecca watched the confirmation appear. She looked toward Daniel. "It's done." Daniel allowed himself the smallest smile. He picked up his phone. At exactly 11:00 a.m., Laura's secure phone vibrated once beneath the conference table. She waited until the presenter finished speaking. Then she glanced discreetly at the screen. Closed. One word. Nothing else. She locked the phone, opened her notebook. Beneath the day's entries, she wrote 11:00 a.m. closing completed. Owner confirmed. She closed the notebook. Her breathing never changed. Her expression remained exactly as it had been an hour earlier. The meeting continued. No one noticed that the legal ownership of Horizon Innovations had changed forever. 11 minutes later, Daniel called. Laura stepped briefly into the hallway before answering. "Congratulations," Daniel said. Laura thanked him quietly. Rebecca joined the call. "The board has unanimously welcomed you as chair." Laura looked through the glass wall toward the conference room where her colleagues continued discussing routine operations. "When will Horizon's board be notified?" Rebecca answered. "They're assembling now." "And the public announcement," Daniel checked his notes. "Delayed until Monday morning." Laura approved immediately. "Good." Daniel understood why. Tuesday's restructuring announcement at Apex Dynamics would occur before anyone there expected the acquisition to become public. The timing would allow events to unfold naturally. No manipulation, no deception. Simply two independent corporate schedules crossing at exactly the wrong moment for Kevin Walker. That afternoon, Horizon Innovations held its first board meeting under new ownership. Laura joined through a secure video connection from a private conference room Daniel had arranged. The directors greeted her respectfully. Board Chair Margaret Ellis smiled warmly. "Welcome." "Thank you," Margaret continued. "We've reviewed your strategic plan." Laura nodded. "I appreciate the board's confidence." Another director spoke. "Most buyers begin with immediate restructuring," Laura answered calmly. "I begin with stability." The directors exchanged approving glances. Laura continued. "Our employees deserve continuity. Our customers deserve confidence. Our competitors deserve professionalism." No one mentioned Apex Dynamics directly. None of them needed to. Everyone in the room understood exactly who the largest competitor remained. After 90 minutes, the meeting concluded. Laura officially became chair of Horizon Innovations. The appointment remained confidential for now. Late that afternoon, she returned to Apex Dynamics. Kevin noticed her entering the executive floor. "You disappeared for a while." "I had an external meeting." "Productive?" "Yes." Kevin smiled. "I'm glad." Neither elaborated. Neither lied. Each understood only part of the truth spoken between them. That evening, Kevin invited Emily to celebrate at a nearby restaurant. He lifted a glass. "To next week." Emily smiled. "To new beginnings." Across the city, Laura met Daniel and Rebecca one final time. Daniel handed her a slim leather portfolio. "Everything inside belongs to you now. Corporate seals, board resolutions, ownership certificates, bank confirmations." Laura accepted it carefully. Months of uncertainty had ended. Another chapter had quietly begun. Daniel looked at her. "How do you feel?" Laura considered the question. Then she answered honestly, "Responsible." Rebecca smiled. "Not victorious." Laura shook her head. "People's jobs now depend on my decisions." Daniel nodded with quiet respect. That answer confirmed everything he had learned about her during the past year. She had never wanted power for its own sake. She wanted the opportunity to exercise it responsibly. Outside, the lights of Chicago reflected across the river. In one office tower, Kevin celebrated a future he believed he controlled. In another, Laura accepted ownership of the very company he expected to defeat. Neither had confronted the other. Neither had revealed their hand. But from this day forward, every strategic decision Kevin made against Horizon Innovations would unknowingly be directed toward a company led by his own wife. The collision between confidence and reality had become unavoidable. It was no longer a question of whether it would happen, only when. Monday morning arrived with the kind of restless anticipation that often preceded major corporate announcements. By 7 o'clock, employees throughout Apex Dynamics had already begun filling the company's internal messaging channels with speculation. Some believed a merger was coming. Others expected aggressive expansion into new markets. Many were convinced that several executives would receive promotions. Only a handful suspected that someone might lose a position. No one imagined how profoundly mistaken they were about the person who truly held the strongest position. Laura Allen entered the building carrying the same leather notebook that had accompanied her every workday for years. She greeted the receptionist. "Good morning." "Morning, Miss Allen." Nothing in her voice hinted that 3 days earlier she had become the legal chair and owner of Horizon Innovations. Nothing in her expression suggested that she now possessed authority extending far beyond the walls of Apex Dynamics. She preferred it that way. Power, she had learned, became more effective when it did not need constant display. At 8 o'clock, an email appeared simultaneously in every employee's inbox. Mandatory company assembly. 10:00 a.m. Executive Auditorium. Attendance required. Within minutes, conversation spread through every department. Employees gathered around coffee stations. Managers exchanged curious glances. Administrative assistants hurried to rearrange schedules. Kevin Walker watched the growing excitement from his office with obvious satisfaction. Emily Carter stepped inside carrying a folder. "The presentation has been loaded." Kevin nodded. "The seating?" "Reserved." "The board?" "They'll be in the front row." Kevin smiled. "And Laura?" Emily glanced at the attendance list. "Third row with the executive leadership team." Kevin leaned back comfortably. "Perfect." He imagined every detail unfolding exactly as planned. Across the hall, Laura continued working as though the company assembly were an ordinary meeting. She completed 2 contract reviews, approved a departmental recommendation, answered several routine emails. At precisely 8:47 a.m., her secure phone vibrated. "Daniel Brooks, everything remains confidential. Press release still scheduled for tomorrow morning." Laura typed a brief reply. "Understood." She locked the phone and returned to work. Timing remained essential. The acquisition had already occurred. The public simply did not know. At 9:30 a.m., employees began entering the executive auditorium. Rows of chairs quickly filled. Large projection screens displayed the Apex Dynamics logo. Music played softly through ceiling speakers. Executives occupied reserved seating near the stage. Laura quietly took her assigned seat in the 3rd row. She opened her notebook, wrote the date, noted the starting time, then rested her pen across the page. Michael Reynolds sat 2 seats away. He leaned slightly toward her. "Quite an event?" "It appears so." "You know what's coming?" "No." It was a truthful answer. She did not know precisely what Kevin intended to announce. Michael smiled nervously. "I have a feeling today's going to surprise people." Laura answered calmly. "It probably will." Backstage, Kevin adjusted his tie while Emily reviewed the presentation one final time. "The organizational charts are correct." Kevin nodded. "The speech?" Loaded into the teleprompter. Richard Bennett entered. "You ready?" Kevin smiled confidently. "I've been ready for months." Richard placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This is your moment." Kevin believed exactly the same thing. At 10 o'clock sharp, the auditorium lights dimmed. Richard Bennett walked onto the stage first. The audience applauded politely. He welcomed employees, reviewed recent financial successes, praised the company's dedication. Then his tone shifted. Every successful organization must continue evolving. Another round of applause followed. Richard smiled. "Today's announcements reflect our commitment to building the strongest leadership team possible." He turned toward Kevin. I'd now like to invite our Executive Vice President of Operations to discuss the next phase of Apex Dynamics. Kevin walked confidently onto the stage. Applause filled the room. Laura remained still. Her notebook lay open. Her pen rested quietly between her fingers. Kevin thanked the audience. He spoke about innovation, growth, competition, efficiency. Every sentence carried confidence. Several employees nodded enthusiastically. Emily watched proudly from the front row. Kevin advanced through several presentation slides. Revenue growth, expansion forecasts, operational improvements. Then the organizational chart appeared. The room became noticeably quieter. Kevin smiled. As our company continues growing, leadership must evolve. He pointed toward the chart. Several responsibilities will be realigned to improve speed and accountability. New reporting lines appeared. Employees leaned forward. Laura observed silently. Exactly as she had expected, nearly every strategic division previously reporting to her office now appeared beneath Kevin's organizational structure. Emily's name occupied an increasingly prominent position. Kevin continued. One of the most important changes involves our strategic leadership. He paused deliberately. I'd like everyone to recognize Emily Carter. Applause echoed through the auditorium. Emily stood, smiling modestly. Kevin looked toward her. Emily has consistently demonstrated exceptional vision energy and adaptability. More applause followed. Laura simply noted the exact time. 10:17 a.m. Kevin continued. Beginning immediately after our transition period, Emily will assume responsibility for leading the company's strategic development initiatives. Whispers spread across the audience. Several employees turned instinctively toward Laura. She remained perfectly composed. Kevin looked directly toward where Laura sat. For organizations to move forward, difficult decisions sometimes become necessary. Silence settled across the auditorium. He smiled politely. I want to thank Laura Allen for her years of service. The wording caught many employees by surprise. Years of service. Not future leadership, past contribution. Yes, so Laura understood the implication immediately. Kevin continued. Laura's role will transition into a limited advisory capacity while Emily leads our strategic direction. The audience hesitated before offering uncertain applause. Many employees clapped politely. Others exchanged uncomfortable looks. Michael Reynolds did not clap at all. Richard Bennett maintained a neutral expression. Emily smiled graciously as though accepting an honor she had already expected. Kevin believed the moment belonged entirely to him. Laura slowly picked up her pen. She wrote every sentence almost word for word. Not because she intended to argue, not because she intended to respond, because statements made publicly often became valuable later. When she finished writing, she closed the notebook. No emotion crossed her face. No anger, no embarrassment, no visible disappointment. Only calm attention. Several employees nearby looked at her with sympathy. One manager quietly whispered, "I'm sorry." Laura offered a polite nod. "Thank you." Nothing more. Kevin concluded the presentation with enthusiastic remarks about Apex Dynamics' future. The audience applauded. Employees gradually began standing. Groups formed almost immediately. Some congratulated Emily. Others quietly questioned the restructuring. Several approached Laura, but hesitated before speaking. Michael Reynolds finally stepped beside her. "You handled that remarkably well." Laura looked toward the stage where Kevin continued shaking hands. There wasn't anything to handle. Michael frowned. "He practically announced your replacement." Laura answered softly. "He announced his decision." Michael studied her expression. "You don't seem surprised." Laura smiled faintly. "I've learned never to be surprised by prepared speeches." Before he could ask another question, Laura's secure phone vibrated inside her handbag. She glanced briefly at the screen. Daniel Brooks. The message contained only one sentence. "Board meeting tomorrow confirmed." Laura locked the screen without replying. Tomorrow, everything would begin changing. Not through arguments, not through public confrontation, through board resolutions, ownership documents, corporate law, exactly as she had planned from the beginning. Meanwhile, Kevin accepted congratulations from nearly every executive present. Emily thanked him repeatedly. Richard Bennett shook his hand. "Excellent presentation." Kevin smiled. "I think the company needed clarity. It certainly got it." Neither man noticed Laura quietly leaving the auditorium. She did not storm out. She did not confront anyone. She simply returned to her office, closed the door, opened her notebook once more. Beneath the final entry, she wrote, "Public statements create permanent expectations." She closed the notebook. Outside her office, employees continued discussing the morning's announcement. Inside Kevin's office, celebrations continued. Inside Horizon Innovations, preparations quietly advanced for the following day's first in-person board meeting under Laura's leadership. And inside Daniel Brooks's law office, attorneys completed the final review of documents that would soon connect those two worlds in a way Kevin Walker had never imagined. For the first time since this story began, the gap between Kevin's confidence and reality had narrowed to less than 24 hours. The stage had been set. The evidence had been preserved. The law had already spoken. Only the public revelation remained. Fan 10. Wednesday morning arrived, with a quiet tension that seemed to sit beneath every conversation inside Apex Dynamics. Nothing official had changed overnight, yet something in the atmosphere felt different. Employees checked financial news more frequently than usual. Managers kept their phones face up on meeting tables. Even Kevin Walker noticed that conversations paused slightly longer when he entered a room. At exactly 8:55 a.m., Laura Allen sat in her office reviewing a final set of internal reports. Her notebook lay closed beside her keyboard. Her expression remained unchanged. At 9:00 a.m. across the financial media landscape, the press release from Horizon Innovations went live. Within minutes, it spread across news terminals, investor platforms, and corporate communication channels. The headline was simple. Horizon Innovations announces new ownership structure under Chair Laura Allen, inside Apex Dynamics. Michael Reynolds was the first to see it. He froze for a moment, reread the line, then stood up abruptly. He walked directly toward Kevin Walker's office. Kevin looked up. "What is it?" Michael placed his tablet on the desk. "You need to see this." Kevin glanced down. At first, he smiled slightly. Another acquisition rumor. Michael said nothing. Kevin read the headline. The smile disappeared. He read it again. His expression tightened. "This must be incorrect." Michael replied carefully. "It's already being reported across 3 major financial networks." Kevin stood slowly. "Laura Allen?" Michael nodded. Kevin picked up the tablet. His eyes moved quickly through the article. Ownership confirmation, board appointment, transaction verification, regulatory approval. Each line added weight to the same conclusion. Finally, he laughed once. A short, disbelieving sound. "This is impossible." Michael remained calm. "It's verified." Kevin shook his head. "There's no way she could have done this without disclosure." Michael answered quietly. Apparently she did. Kevin stared at the screen again. For the first time in years, his confidence failed to translate into certainty. At 9:15 a.m., Emily Carter entered Kevin's office. Her expression showed immediate concern. "It's everywhere." Kevin didn't look up. "How is this possible?" Emily hesitated. "People are saying she led the acquisition personally." Kevin finally looked at her. "That doesn't make sense." Emily lowered her voice. "She's listed as chair." Silence filled the room. Kevin slowly sat back down. "This is some kind of filing error." Michael answered. "It's already been confirmed by regulatory databases." Kevin's jaw tightened. Then someone is manipulating the narrative. No one responded, because no one believed that anymore. At 9:30 a.m., Richard Bennett called an emergency executive meeting. Within 10 minutes, the entire senior leadership team was seated in the conference room. The atmosphere was different from any meeting they had ever experienced. No one joked, no one checked emails. Richard placed a printed copy of the press release on the table. "This is real." Kevin responded immediately. "We need to verify the source." Michael shook his head. "It's already verified." Richard looked at Kevin. "Explain to me how your wife became chair of Horizon Innovations without anyone at this company knowing." The question landed heavily. Kevin's voice tightened. "I wasn't aware of any acquisition." Laura had not yet entered the room. Her name, however, now filled it. Emily spoke quietly. "She never mentioned anything." Richard leaned forward. "That's not what I asked." Silence followed. Kevin finally said, "This must be a coincidence." Michael responded immediately. "There is no coincidence in a regulated acquisition of this scale." Richard exhaled slowly. "Then we have a problem." Kevin looked around the table. "We don't have a problem." He hesitated. "They do." No one asked who they referred to, because everyone understood. At 9:55 a.m., Laura Allen entered the conference room. She was carrying her notebook. No documents, no presentation, no visible urgency. She took her usual seat. Only this time, every person in the room looked at her differently. Kevin did not speak immediately. Neither did Richard. Michael was the first. "It's true." Laura looked at him. "Yes." The room went completely silent. Kevin finally spoke. "You acquired Horizon Innovations." Laura answered calmly. "Yes." Kevin shook his head slightly. "Without informing this company," Laura responded evenly. "There was no requirement to disclose a personal investment outside Apex Dynamics." Richard interjected. "Your chair?" "Yes." Kevin leaned forward. "When did this happen?" Laura looked at him. "The acquisition completed last Friday." Kevin's expression tightened. "You were already planning this while sitting in our meetings." Laura did not hesitate. "I was executing a separate legal process." Emily spoke quietly. "You knew everything we were doing?" Laura turned slightly toward her. "I observed everything you chose to disclose." Kevin's voice rose slightly. "So, you've been building this in secret while we were—" Laura interrupted calmly. "I was completing a regulated acquisition governed by confidentiality agreements." Silence returned. Kevin laughed again, but this time, it carried no confidence. "You let me stand in front of the entire company and replace your position yesterday." Laura held his gaze. "You made a decision based on the authority you believed you had." Richard leaned back slowly. "This changes everything." Laura replied softly. It clarifies everything. Michael looked between them. So, Horizon is now under your control. Laura nodded, legally and operationally. Kevin's expression hardened. You planned this entire overlap. Laura answered simply. I executed a timeline that was already approved months ago. Emily whispered. That means our competition. Laura completed the sentence calmly. Reports to me now. The room froze again. Kevin slowly stood. This is not over. Laura looked at him. It's already over. Kevin's voice lowered. You used me. Laura did not react. I did not interact with your decisions. Richard finally spoke. Kevin, sit down. Kevin ignored him. This is corporate manipulation. Laura answered evenly. No. This is corporate law. Silence followed again. The weight of the distinction settled across the table. Kevin slowly looked at Richard. You can't allow this. Richard didn't respond immediately. Then he said quietly, It's already been approved by regulators. Kevin looked at Laura. For the first time, his confidence disappeared completely. Laura opened her notebook. She wrote one line. 9:58 a.m. notification delivered. Then she closed it. She looked around the room. Unless there are procedural questions, I have a board meeting to attend at Horizon Innovations in 40 minutes. No one responded. Kevin remained standing. Emily avoided his gaze. Michael looked down at the table. Richard exhaled slowly. Meeting adjourned. Laura stood. She left the room without urgency, without ceremony, without looking back. In the hallway, employees continued working, unaware that the structure of two major companies had just shifted inside a single conference room. Inside Kevin's office, silence followed the meeting. Emily eventually spoke. She never intended to tell us. Kevin stared at the wall. No. He finally understood something he had ignored for months. Laura had never been reacting. She had been executing. Across the city horizon, Innovations prepared for its first official leadership session under its new chair. And for the first time since Kevin Walker had begun believing he controlled the future of Apex Dynamics, he realized that every decision he had made in the past weeks had been observed, recorded, and absorbed into a system far larger than he had ever imagined. Not one of conflict, but of preparation. Fan 12. Thursday morning arrived with a colder edge in the air, as if Chicago itself had begun reacting to the shifting balance between two corporations, now quietly tied together by unseen ownership. Inside Apex Dynamics, the atmosphere had changed from shock to uncertainty. Employees no longer spoke about what happened in abstract terms. They now spoke about consequences. Emails circulated faster. Meetings were more cautious. Even Kevin Walker noticed the subtle shift in how people looked at him, less admiration, more evaluation. As if confidence alone was no longer enough. Laura Allen, however, moved through the building with the same steady rhythm as always. She reviewed compliance documents, signed off on 2 vendor contracts, held a brief meeting with her remaining strategy team. Nothing in her behavior suggested disruption. But everything she touched now carried a different weight. Michael Reynolds noticed it first. He entered her office mid-morning, closing the door behind him. I've been reviewing internal approvals from the last quarter. Laura looked up from her screen. Go on. Michael hesitated. Some of Kevin's directives bypassed standard risk review. Laura waited. Not just once, he added. Several times. She closed the file in front of her. Are you documenting it? Michael nodded. Yes. Laura replied calmly. Then continue. Michael frowned slightly. You're not surprised. Laura stood and walked toward the window. No. She looked out at the city. Patterns are rarely sudden. Michael studied her carefully. You knew this was happening. Laura answered without turning. I observed it. And you didn't stop it. She finally looked at him. I didn't need to. The simplicity of the answer unsettled him more than any accusation could have. At 10:30 a.m., Kevin convened a small executive review session. Only his closest leadership team attended. Emily Carter sat beside him, reviewing revised operational charts. Michael Reynolds was present, though noticeably reserved. Richard Bennett joined remotely. Kevin began immediately. We need to stabilize messaging across both companies. Emily nodded. Employees are confused. Kevin continued. Horizon's acquisition shouldn't affect our strategy. Michael spoke carefully. It already is affecting perception. Kevin looked at him sharply. Perception doesn't change execution. Michael answered quietly. It changes trust. The room went silent for a moment. Kevin leaned forward. Trust is earned through results. Laura, seated across the table, finally spoke. Trust is also maintained through transparency. Kevin turned toward her. We were transparent. Laura's voice remained calm. Partial transparency creates incomplete understanding. Emily interjected. Most companies don't disclose acquisition details in advance. Laura replied evenly. Most companies don't structure acquisitions within overlapping competitive leadership cycles. No one responded immediately. Richard's voice came through the speaker. This situation is unusual. Laura nodded. Yes. Kevin leaned back. But it's resolved. Laura closed her notebook gently. It is ongoing. Kevin frowned. What does that mean? Laura looked directly at him. It means the effects have not yet fully appeared. The room grew quiet again. Michael looked down at his notes. For the first time, Kevin seemed unsure whether the conversation was about past decisions or future consequences. By early afternoon, internal reports began circulating across Apex Dynamics. Several long-term strategic projects were now flagged for external review. Some vendor agreements required revalidation. Certain partnership discussions were paused. Nothing was formally negative. But everything felt slowed. Kevin noticed. Emily noticed. Michael noticed. Richard noticed most of all. In his private office, Richard called Kevin. We need to reassess communication strategy. Kevin responded immediately. Because of Horizon. Because of uncertainty. Kevin frowned. We control our direction. Richard paused. Control is not the same as perception. Kevin did not answer immediately. That distinction was becoming harder to ignore. At 2:00 p.m., Laura attended a confidential Horizon Innovations strategy briefing via secure conference link. The board members were present. Daniel Brooks moderated. Rebecca Collins presented market analysis. Everything pointed toward a stable integration phase. No aggressive expansion. No immediate structural disruption. One director asked, should we expect retaliation from Apex Dynamics? Laura answered without hesitation. No. The director raised an eyebrow. Why not? Laura closed a document on her screen. Because their assumptions about us are incomplete. Daniel observed her carefully. You expect miscalculation. Laura corrected gently. I expect continuation of existing patterns. Rebecca leaned forward. Meaning, Laura replied, they will continue acting as if nothing fundamental has changed. Silence followed. Daniel understood immediately. That was not optimism. It was observation. Meanwhile, back at Apex Dynamics, Kevin stood alone in his office after the meeting ended. Emily had left earlier. Michael was reviewing financial reports. Richard was in a separate call. Kevin stared at the city skyline. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar beneath his usual confidence. Not fear, not exactly doubt. Something closer to misalignment. As if the structure he believed he controlled was no longer responding predictably. His phone rang. A senior analyst. "Sir, we've identified delays in 3 Horizon-linked procurement pipelines." Kevin frowned. "What kind of delays?" "Procedural review holds." Kevin exhaled sharply. "Fix it." The analyst hesitated. "They're not internal delays." Kevin paused. "What do you mean?" "They're external approvals." Kevin ended the call. Slowly, he looked out the window again. Something was shifting. Quietly, systematically, and not inside his control. That evening, Laura remained in her office longer than usual. She reviewed Horizon's integration metrics, employee retention, client confidence indexes, supply chain consistency. Everything remained stable. She closed the final report and wrote a short note in her notebook. Stability holds under observation. Then she closed it. Daniel Brooks called shortly after. "There's something you should know." Laura waited. Apex Dynamics has begun reviewing all Horizon-linked competitive assumptions. Laura responded calmly. "As expected." Daniel paused. "They are still operating under the belief that Horizon's position remains independent in behavior." Laura nodded. "They will continue that belief until the market forces otherwise." Daniel asked quietly, "Do you intend to correct it?" Laura answered after a pause, "No correction is necessary." He understood. She was not interested in persuading perception, only in allowing reality to unfold at its own pace. Later that night, Kevin sat with Emily in a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. He stirred his drink without drinking it. Emily spoke carefully. "Do you think she's interfering?" Kevin looked at her. "I think she's observing." Emily frowned. "That sounds worse." Kevin did not respond immediately. He finally said, "It feels like we're reacting to something we can't see." Emily hesitated. "Then we need more information." Kevin nodded slowly. "Yes," but even as he said it, he realized something uncomfortable. They already had information. They simply didn't understand its structure. Across the city, Laura Allen walked home alone through softly lit streets. Her notebook remained closed. Her decisions for the day were already complete. Not because everything had been resolved, but because everything had been properly recorded. And in her world, what was recorded would eventually become unavoidable. Friday morning arrived with a quieter tone inside Apex Dynamics, as if the building itself had begun conserving its energy for something unresolved. The past days had created a pattern no one could fully explain. Meetings that ended without clarity. Decisions that required follow-up clarification. Reports that raised more questions than answers. Kevin Walker felt it more than anyone else. He had always been comfortable in environments he could predict. Growth charts, market responses, competitive reactions. But now, for the first time in his career, the responses no longer aligned with expectations. Emily Carter arrived early that morning carrying a tablet filled with revised forecasts. "We need to adjust projections again," she said. Kevin frowned. "Why?" "Several Horizon-linked contracts are still under external review." Michael Reynolds, already seated in the conference room, added quietly, "It's affecting our timeline accuracy." Kevin exhaled sharply. This shouldn't be happening. Michael replied carefully. It is happening. Silence followed. Kevin looked at both of them. Then we accelerate internal execution. Michael hesitated. Acceleration without clarity increases risk. Kevin's voice tightened. We don't wait for clarity. At the far end of the table, Richard Bennett entered. He immediately sensed the tension. We're starting. Kevin nodded, forcing control over his expression. The executive review meeting began with standard agenda items: operational updates, financial summaries, resource allocations. But the atmosphere no longer matched the structure of the agenda. Every report seemed to carry hidden implications. Every silence felt heavier than usual. Richard eventually placed a hand on the table. We need to address the situation with Horizon directly. Kevin responded immediately. There is no situation. Richard looked at him, then explained the delays. Kevin answered firmly. External procedural adjustments. Michael interjected. They're affecting multiple divisions simultaneously. Kevin turned toward him. And we resolve them internally. Laura Allen had remained silent throughout the discussion. Now she finally spoke. Internal resolution assumes internal control. Kevin looked at her. We do have control. Laura met his gaze calmly. Control is not uniform across interconnected systems. Kevin frowned. What does that mean? Laura answered evenly. It means external ownership changes create internal dependency shifts. The room grew still. Emily leaned forward. Are you saying Horizon is influencing us? Laura replied without emotion. I am saying our assumptions about independence are incomplete. Kevin shook his head. This is overanalysis. Laura did not react. I am describing structure, not interpretation. Richard leaned back slowly. Is there something we are not seeing? Laura paused briefly. Possibly. Kevin's tone sharpened. Or you're suggesting uncertainty where none exists. Laura turned slightly toward him. I am suggesting observation over assumption. Silence followed again. Michael looked down at his notes. For the first time, Kevin noticed that no one in the room fully supported his confidence anymore. Not openly, not directly, but noticeably. After the meeting, Kevin returned to his office and closed the door. Emily followed him inside moments later. That didn't go well. Kevin sat down heavily. They're overthinking everything. Emily hesitated. Or something is actually changing. Kevin looked at her sharply, not without visible signals. Emily lowered her voice. There are signals. Kevin leaned back. Like what? She opened her tablet. 3 delayed approvals, 2 halted vendor agreements, 1 paused strategic collaboration. Kevin frowned. That's procedural noise. Emily looked uncertain. It feels coordinated. Kevin stood abruptly. It feels like coincidence interpreted as pattern. Emily said nothing, but she did not look convinced. At 2:00 p.m., Michael Reynolds knocked on Laura Allen's office door. Do you have a moment? Laura looked up. Yes. He entered slowly. I've been analyzing financial flow disruptions. Laura closed her document. Go on. Michael placed a printed report on her desk. They're not random. Laura studied it. I know. Michael frowned. You expected this. Laura leaned back slightly. I expected correlation between ownership change and operational realignment. Michael paused. Is Horizon doing this intentionally? Laura answered calmly. No. Michael looked confused. Then what is causing it? Laura turned the page of her notebook. System recalibration. Michael exhaled. That sounds like avoidance of responsibility. Laura met his eyes. It is a neutral description of structural adjustment. Michael studied her carefully. You're not worried. Laura paused. Worry is not a productive variable. Michael shook his head slightly. I don't understand how you stay so composed. Laura answered simply. I documented everything long before it became visible. Michael left the room more unsettled than reassured. By late afternoon, rumors inside Apex Dynamics had shifted again. This time, they were no longer about promotions or restructuring. They were about influence, about Horizon Innovations not behaving like a typical competitor, about decisions that seemed to echo across both companies in unexpected ways. Kevin heard fragments of these conversations as he walked through the executive floor. He stopped briefly near a group of analysts. What are you talking about? One of them hesitated. It's just timing patterns. Kevin frowned. Explain. The analyst lowered his voice. When Horizon adjusts procurement cycles, our vendors respond within hours. Kevin's expression hardened. Correlation is not control. The analyst nodded quickly. Yes, sir. But Kevin noticed something in his eyes. Doubt. That evening, Richard Bennett called an emergency advisory session. Kevin, Emily, Michael, and several senior directors joined. Richard began immediately. We are seeing consistent operational shifts linked to Horizon's internal changes. Kevin interrupted. They are not controlling us. Richard held up a hand. No one said control. Michael spoke carefully. But influence is undeniable. Kevin turned sharply. Based on what? Michael answered. Data patterns, Emily added quietly. It's not isolated anymore. Silence followed. Richard finally looked at Kevin. We need clarity. Kevin leaned forward. There is clarity. We are reacting to noise. Laura Allen, who had joined the session remotely from Horizon's side of the system, spoke for the first time. It is not noise. Kevin froze slightly. Her voice came through the speaker system calmly. It is alignment of operational systems under changed ownership conditions. Kevin's voice tightened. You are not part of this discussion. Laura responded evenly. I am part of both systems. Silence filled the room. Richard exhaled slowly. Laura, can you clarify? Laura answered without hesitation. Ownership creates linkage. Linkage creates dependency awareness. Awareness creates observable pattern shifts. Michael looked at Kevin. Kevin said nothing. For the first time, he had no immediate rebuttal. After the call ended, Emily spoke quietly. She's not interfering directly, Michael added. But everything adjusts when she moves anything on her side. Kevin stood slowly. That doesn't make sense. Richard looked at him. It makes sense in systems theory. Kevin shook his head. This is not theoretical. Michael replied gently. It might be now. That night, Kevin returned home late. Laura was already there, sitting at the dining table, reading. Kevin stopped when he saw her. You're involved in this. Laura looked up. Involved in what? The disruptions. She closed her book. I am managing Horizon Innovations. Kevin stepped closer. And it's affecting us. Laura answered calmly. Independent systems interact when they share market environments. Kevin's voice rose slightly. You knew this would happen. Laura paused. I knew structure produces consequence. Kevin stared at her. For the first time, frustration replaced confidence completely. You planned this overlap. Laura answered softly. I executed a lawful acquisition. Kevin shook his head. This isn't just business anymore. Laura looked at him. It is only business. Silence followed. Kevin finally stepped back. He realized something uncomfortable. He no longer understood the scale of what he was dealing with. And worse, he was no longer sure he was even speaking within the same system that Laura operated in. Across the city, Horizon Innovations continued functioning with calm precision. Inside both companies, the same pattern was emerging. Not conflict, not disruption, but gradual, undeniable alignment. And Kevin Walker, for the first time since his rise through Apex Dynamics, felt something unfamiliar taking shape. Not defeat, not yet, but the beginning of something he could no longer control. Monday morning arrived without ceremony, but nothing about the day felt ordinary inside Apex Dynamics. The atmosphere had shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. Reports that once moved smoothly through departments now paused for additional review. Decisions that used to take hours now required clarification. Executives spoke more carefully, as if every sentence might later be revisited under different conditions. Kevin Walker felt that shift more than anyone else. He had not slept well. Not because of exhaustion, but because of something more uncomfortable uncertainty that refused to resolve itself into a clear problem he could solve. He arrived at the office earlier than usual. Emily Carter was already there. Michael Reynolds joined 10 minutes later. Richard Bennett entered last, carrying a sealed folder marked Legal and Governance Review. No one spoke until everyone was seated. Richard placed the folder in the center of the table. This is no longer about speculation. Kevin leaned forward. Then what is it about? Richard opened the folder. Formal findings. Michael exhaled slowly. Kevin's expression tightened. Findings from what? Richard answered carefully. Cross-corporate governance review triggered by Horizon Innovations' ownership disclosure. Emily looked confused. We didn't trigger anything. Michael shook his head. We did, indirectly. Kevin frowned. Explain. Michael slid a document across the table. Once Horizon became a legally independent competitor under new ownership, all prior assumptions about shared market neutrality changed. Kevin interrupted sharply. This is bureaucracy. Richard looked at him. It is compliance. Silence followed. Then Richard continued. Several of our recent strategic decisions are now under external audit review. Kevin stared at him. External? Richard nodded. Initiated by regulatory alignment protocols. Emily's voice lowered. Because of Horizon, Michael answered quietly. Because of ownership restructuring. Kevin leaned back slowly. So now we're being reviewed because she bought another company. No one corrected him, because technically that was true, but incomplete. And in corporate law, incompleteness was often where consequences lived. Across the city, Laura Allen sat in Horizon Innovations' boardroom, reviewing post-acquisition integration reports. Everything remained stable. Employee retention above projections. Client contracts fully intact. Operational efficiency improving slightly due to unified reporting structures. Daniel Brooks entered quietly and placed a new binder in front of her. Regulatory review update. Laura opened it. Inside were confirmation notices from multiple oversight bodies. No violations, no restrictions, only standard post-acquisition monitoring procedures. Daniel watched her carefully. Everything is proceeding cleanly? Laura nodded. Good. He hesitated. Apex Dynamics is under formal review escalation. Laura did not look up. Expected. Daniel studied her. Are you concerned about the impact? Laura closed the binder. Impact is already occurring. The question is whether it is structural or temporary. Daniel nodded slowly. Your conclusion, Laura answered calmly. Structural adjustment, not disruption. She stood. Continue monitoring both systems independently. Daniel understood exactly what she meant. She was not managing two companies as separate entities. She was observing them as interconnected systems operating under newly defined ownership boundaries. At Apex Dynamics, the emergency governance session reconvened at 11:00 a.m. Richard Bennett began. We have received preliminary audit flags. Kevin immediately responded. From Horizon. Richard shook his head. From regulatory compliance triggered by overlapping market activity, Michael added quietly. It's not about Horizon alone anymore. Kevin frowned. Then what is it about? Michael hesitated. About structural linkage after acquisition. Emily leaned forward. So every decision they make now affects us, Michael answered carefully. Indirectly, yes. Kevin stood abruptly. This is exactly what I was talking about. Overanalysis. We are reacting to coincidence. Laura's voice came through the conference speaker. It is not coincidence. Kevin froze. Richard looked toward the speaker system. Laura, you're on the line. Yes. Kevin spoke sharply. You're monitoring our internal review now, Laura answered calmly. I'm responding to a governance inquiry that affects both organizations. Kevin's frustration rose. You are the cause of this review. Laura did not hesitate. No. Structural change triggered regulatory reassessment. Silence followed. Michael spoke carefully. So this is expected, Laura replied. Yes, Emily asked quietly. For how long? Laura paused. Until market systems stabilize under new ownership alignment. Kevin shook his head. You speak like we're inside a simulation. Laura answered evenly. Corporate systems operate on predictable regulatory mechanics. Kevin stepped closer to the table. You're dismantling our operations without touching them directly. Laura responded without emotion. I am not dismantling anything. Richard raised a hand. Enough. The room fell silent. He looked at Kevin. We need to adapt. Kevin looked stunned. Adapt to what exactly? Michael answered. To the fact that Horizon is no longer an external competitor in the traditional sense. Kevin's voice lowered. Then what is it? Michael replied slowly. An interdependent entity under shared regulatory observation. Kevin sat down again. For the first time, he said nothing. That afternoon, internal confusion at Apex Dynamics increased. Reports required revalidation. Vendor agreements were paused for legal clarification. Several strategic initiatives were temporarily frozen, not because of failure, but because of oversight expansion. Employees began noticing delays that had no clear cause. Kevin walked through the floor, hearing fragments of conversations. It's like everything depends on something outside the company now. We've never had to check this many approvals before. Something changed after the acquisition. Kevin stopped at a workstation. What did you just say? The employee froze. I mean, Horizon acquisition created additional compliance checks. Kevin nodded slowly. That's temporary. But even as he said it, he no longer sounded certain. That evening, Kevin confronted Richard privately. This is escalating. Richard closed his office door. It is stabilizing under review. Kevin shook his head. We are losing control of internal timing. Richard looked at him directly. We are not losing control. We are losing assumptions. Kevin exhaled sharply. This is because of her. Richard did not answer immediately. Then he said quietly, It is because of structure. Kevin stared at him. That's the same thing now, Richard replied firmly. No, it is not. Silence followed. Kevin finally asked, How long until this settles? Richard hesitated. I don't know. That was the first time Kevin had heard uncertainty from him. Late that night, Kevin returned home. Laura was already there. Sitting at the dining table, her notebook open. Kevin stopped. We're under formal regulatory review. Laura looked up. I know. Kevin's voice tightened. And you're not concerned. Laura closed her notebook gently. It is procedural. Kevin stepped closer. This is affecting everything. Laura met his gaze calmly. Only temporarily. Kevin shook his head. You say that like you're outside of it, Laura answered softly. I am not outside of it. Kevin frowned. Then why does it feel like you're controlling it? Laura paused. I am not controlling outcomes. She looked at him. I am observing system responses. Kevin's frustration finally broke through. You planned all of this. Laura answered without emotion. I followed a lawful acquisition process that required confidentiality. Kevin stared at her. And for the first time, he understood something uncomfortable. This was no longer about competition, or even about business. It was about scale. And he was no longer certain he was operating at the same scale as her. Across the city, regulatory systems continued updating in real time. Two companies, now linked, now observed, now adjusting. Not because of conflict, but because structure had changed. And structures once changed did not ask permission to reshape everything connected to them. Thursday morning arrived with a quietness that felt almost final. Inside Apex Dynamics, there was no dramatic collapse, no sudden announcement, no visible breaking point. Instead, there was something more unsettling stability under continuous correction. Systems still functioned, but every function now required additional verification. Every decision carried a second layer of oversight that had not existed before. Kevin Walker noticed it the moment he entered the building. The executive floor no longer felt like a space of momentum. It felt like a space of evaluation. Emily Carter arrived shortly after him, holding a printed schedule filled with revised approvals. Michael Reynolds was already inside the conference room when Kevin entered. Richard Bennett followed moments later. No one spoke immediately. The silence itself had become part of the routine. Finally, Richard placed a document on the table. Regulatory status update. Kevin didn't sit. What now? Richard answered carefully. Nothing new. That's the issue. Kevin frowned. Michael clarified. There are no violations, no penalties, no enforcement actions. Emily looked confused. Then why does everything feel slower? Michael hesitated. Because oversight has become continuous. Kevin shook his head. This is still about horizon. Richard responded calmly. It started there. It didn't end there. That sentence lingered longer than anything else. Kevin finally sat down. So, we're being monitored indefinitely because of an acquisition. Michael answered gently. Because of structural integration between two market systems. Kevin let out a short, humorless laugh. She bought a company, and now we're all operating under review. No one corrected him again. Because correction no longer changed anything. At the same time across the city, Laura Allen stood in Horizon Innovations' executive office, overlooking downtown Chicago. The city looked unchanged, but the systems beneath it were not. Daniel Brooks entered and placed a final briefing folder on her desk. Post-acquisition stabilization report. Laura opened it. Employee retention steady. Client contracts stable. Operational performance improving slightly under unified compliance standards. Daniel spoke quietly. Apex Dynamics is now under extended regulatory observation. Laura nodded, as expected. He studied her. Kevin Walker is struggling to adapt. Laura closed the folder. He is interpreting structural change as personal action. Daniel hesitated. Is it? Laura looked at him calmly. No. She paused slightly. It is a systemic reaction to ownership realignment. Daniel nodded slowly. And emotionally? Laura answered without hesitation. I do not operate based on emotional variables. Daniel accepted that without argument. He had learned long ago that her decisions did not originate from reaction. They originated from structure, timing, and documented consequence. Back at Apex Dynamics, the final executive review meeting of the week began at 10:00 a.m. Richard Bennett opened it with a measured tone. We need to address internal morale. Kevin leaned forward. There is no morale issue. Michael responded quietly. There is uncertainty, Emily added carefully. Employees are asking questions we cannot fully answer. Kevin frowned. Then we give them clarity. Richard looked at him. Clarity about what? Kevin hesitated. That we are still in control. Michael answered gently. Control is no longer the only variable. Silence followed. Then Laura's voice came through the conference system again. I agree. Kevin stiffened. Richard looked toward the speaker. Laura. Again. Yes. Kevin's tone sharpened. You are not part of our internal executive meeting. Laura responded calmly. I am responding to regulatory linkage conditions that affect both organizations. Michael exhaled quietly. It's becoming impossible to separate them completely. Kevin shook his head. This is exactly what I warned about. Laura answered evenly. You warned about competition. This is integration of oversight structures. Kevin looked frustrated. This is not integration. This is interference. Laura did not react. It is compliance architecture operating as designed. Richard rubbed his forehead. This conversation is not helping. Kevin leaned back. Then what does help? Laura answered softly. Adaptation to observed system behavior. Silence followed again. But this time, Kevin did not interrupt. That afternoon, internal operations at Apex Dynamics entered what analysts would later describe as a stabilized constraint phase. It meant nothing officially broke, but nothing moved freely either. Every approval required validation. Every contract required external confirmation. Every strategic adjustment triggered secondary review. Kevin walked through the office observing it all. Employees worked, but more carefully. Managers decided, but more slowly. Executives spoke, but with hesitation. Emily approached him quietly. This isn't going away. Kevin didn't respond immediately. Michael joined them. It's not meant to go away. Kevin looked at both of them. Then what is it meant to do? Michael answered carefully. Align both companies under regulatory consistency. Kevin exhaled. So we've become dependent on her company. Michael corrected him. Interdependent systems respond to shared governance frameworks. Kevin shook his head. I don't care what it's called. His voice lowered. It's her. Michael said nothing. because arguing terminology no longer mattered. The outcome was already in motion. That evening, Kevin remained in his office long after everyone had left. Richard had gone home. Emily had left early. Michael had finished his reports and departed quietly. Kevin sat alone, staring at the city skyline. For the first time, he did not review strategy documents. He did not plan competitive responses. He simply observed. And slowly, something became clear to him. Every decision he had made over the past months, every restructuring, every confident announcement, every attempt to redefine Laura's role, had not altered the direction of events. They had only moved within a system that was already being shaped elsewhere. His phone vibrated. A message from external counsel. Regulatory observation confirmed ongoing structural linkage between Apex Dynamics and Horizon Innovations under Unified Compliance Review Framework. Kevin closed the message without replying. He leaned back slowly, and for the first time, he understood the distinction he had resisted for weeks. He had believed he was competing. But competition required separation, and separation no longer existed. Across the city, Laura Allen finished her final report for the day. She closed her notebook. Daniel Brooks stood near the door. Tomorrow's market briefing will reflect full disclosure. Laura nodded. Good. He watched her carefully. Any final instructions? Laura paused. No corrective action required. Daniel smiled slightly. That has been your answer from the beginning. Laura looked toward the window. It remains sufficient. Outside, Chicago continued its rhythm. Inside, two corporate tower systems adjusted quietly to a new structure that neither company had fully experienced before. Not collapse, not victory, but alignment under law, documentation, and time. And Kevin Walker, sitting alone in the fading light of his office, finally stopped trying to interpret it as something he could still reverse, because for the first time, he understood the truth that had been forming since the day Laura Allen stopped reacting. She had never been competing for a position. She had been building the framework that defined what positions still meant. There are moments in business where nothing appears to change on the surface, yet everything beneath it has already shifted permanently. Kevin Walker believed power was something demonstrated through speeches, decisions, and visible authority. For a long time, that belief worked for him, until it didn't. Laura Allen never tried to outshout anyone. She never needed to. Her decisions were not built in reaction, but in structured documents, approvals, timelines, and systems that continued operating long after conversations ended. By the time Kevin recognized the scale of what had happened, it was no longer something that could be challenged in a meeting or reversed through confidence. It was already law, already recorded, already functioning. And in that quiet difference, everything changed. Not through confrontation, not through revenge, but through preparation, meeting reality at exactly the right moment. Laura did not leave the story with noise. She left it with continuity. A company stabilized, another aligned, and a system that no longer belonged to assumptions, but to verified structure. If this story resonated with you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, especially where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you enjoy stories about quiet strength, legal precision, and emotional depth, you're welcome to subscribe for more.